Hey folks, thanks for watching my video and thanks for taking time out of the day to hear what I have to say. As you know, my name is Edward and this is one of my projects for Grand Canyon University. In my agenda and my presentation for today, I'll be talking about appropriate strategies for gathering information, um, techniques on how to evaluate that information, and before using that information on an essay, let's say we want to know, or we want our students to know about copyright and fair use policy, or at least an idea. So talking about appropriate strategies, basically we are teaching our kids how to appropriately or strategically gather information. We want to ask, we want to address topics such as where is the information coming from. So we'll talk a little bit later in the presentation, but obviously we want to address things like, do we know the author, or the purpose of the information, or the point of view, or where's the facts coming from. More importantly, is where are our students gathering their information. So we want to encourage them to gather their resources from databases. For example, universities have a database that students can access. High schools usually have to subscribe to a database. EBSCO is one example. Other databases that can give students some help here is Google Scholar and ERIC. And within these, and of course there's Wikipedia, but Wikipedia does not necessarily provide the types of resources that are often needed. When we're accessing these databases, we want to make sure they're researching or using a particular type of source. So, for example, we want to encourage them to find periodicals, scholarly journals, newspapers, popular magazines. We want to shy away from websites and blogs where the information or author may not be credible or have the credentials. When we find our resource, we want to also teach our kids techniques on how to evaluate that. So as I alluded to earlier, let's talk about the author. We basically want our kids to go through a series of questions. So for example, what do they know about the author? Not only the name, but what about the credentials? We want them to look at things like what is the purpose of the article? What is the objective of the article, and are the author and the sources reliable and credible? So just as an example, an author could write a piece which could be completely opinionated, or it could be founded in fact. So we want to be able to give our kids those types of tools when researching and using those articles for their own papers. Lastly, we want to make sure that before they use or cite any of these sources, or we actually want to make sure they can know when to cite these sources. So we're going to talk just real briefly about copyright and fair use policy. Copyright has to do with basically a work that is protected, and we want to encourage them to look into that work, see if it's protected, and if it is, make sure they cite it. So copyright protects against original works, including, let's say, literary, dramatic, or musical, artistic works, poetry, novels, movies, etc., songs, computer software. So I was like, what copyright does not protect against are things like facts, ideas, maybe methods of operation. In terms of who owns the rights, it could be a person, the original creator or author of a work. For example, our students are typically researching periodicals and journals, and so the author listed there owns the work. Lastly, we want to ask ourselves, what is fair use? And fair use is a set of guidelines that allows you to use part of a copyrighted work for educational purposes, such as a report or multimedia presentation. Fair use promotes the freedom of expression by permitting the unlicensed use of copyright works in certain circumstances. And so, for example, one of those circumstances could be nonprofit or educational. Also, the amount of the portion used in relation to the copyrighted work as a whole is a factor. So those would be examples, factors to consider for fair use. So I know this was short. Hopefully it gave you guys just enough information to spark a conversation and get you and your students interested. And these are my references. And thank you very much.